My name is Dr. Benjamin Vialle. I'm a psychiatry trainee. I'm coming to you live from Tasmania. I'm last year's Doctor-in-Training Medical Adviser at Avant and continue to have a great relationship with Avant. I'm the host for tonight's webinar, Navigate Your Medical Career with Dr. Jocelyn Lowinger. I want to start in the spirit of reconciliation by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So you, as a participant in this webinar, well know that the pressure on doctors and early career doctors is really immense sometimes. And as you move through the early stages of your medical career, there are a lot of options ahead of you. And many of us have questions. How do we avoid burnout? How do we get the support we need to navigate our careers in a healthy, fulfilling, sustainable way? Our guest speaker tonight is here to share some practical strategies to help all of us to shape careers that are going to be best for you. First, a little bit of housekeeping. Again, with lots of people joining us tonight, we'll have to keep you all on mute. Jump on the chat and send your questions. And we'll be monitoring those and we'll be asking Dr. Lowinger some of those questions at the end. Dr. Jocelyn Lowinger is giving away 5 introductory coaching sessions. And those are going to go to the best questions submitted in that pre-registration phase or in the chat this evening. The kind team at Avant will jump on and make sure you've got access to a link in the chat with the terms and conditions of that contest. Everybody online tonight will receive a free ebook to help you reflect on your values and to begin designing a career that excites you. Again, our team will post the link in the chat at the end of the webinar. At the end of our night, you'll be asked to just fill in a short survey. It'll pop up as you exit. We really appreciate if you take a few minutes to give a bit of feedback, share topic suggestions, and keep Avant accountable and say, hey, this is what we want to hear about and this is who we want to hear from and these are the issues that are close to our hearts as training doctors. We've got lots to get through tonight. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker, Dr. Jocelyn Lowinger. She's a former GP and she started Coach GP in 2018 to give doctors the support that she wishes she had when figuring out what type of doctor she wanted to be. Using a combination of evidence-based coaching and counselling strategies that develop the whole person. Dr. Jocelyn Lowinger has coached hundreds of doctors from all stages and specialties to figure out their way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jocelyn Lowinger.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Benjamin, for that wonderful introduction. I'm also excited to be here presenting on behalf of Avant because I'm also an Avant member. So I was really honoured to be invited to present to you this evening. And as Benjamin mentioned, we do have a lot to go through. So we'll see how we go. Aiming to speak for about 45 minutes and then we're going to open it up for questions at the end, but feel free to write your questions in the chat as we go along. Whoops. So this is me. You can see me. So in the registration form, we asked for people to write some questions on their concerns about their career, and we ended up with 304 questions over a hugely broad range of topics about coaching, how it works, about how to go about choosing a specialty, how to get involved in non-traditional and non-clinical careers, how do you manage imposter syndrome and burnout. And honestly, each of those topics is a full webinar all on their own. So what my aim to do tonight is to give an overview and spark some interest in those topics. And I'm supporting this webinar is supported with an ebook that I've written that's got hopefully a lot more information that answers a lot of your questions, because we just don't have time to go that in depth tonight. So what I am going to cover today is I'm going to just give you a very brief overview of what is a coaching approach, because there seem to be quite a few questions about what that is. And it's really important to frame up in the beginning what I'm doing. And then I'm going to go through the structure, the coaching approach structure, which is really looking at who are you, where do you want to go, how are you going to get there? And, you know, in those things, understanding the difference between traditional and non-traditional careers, and thinking about starting to manage imposter syndrome and burnout. And of course, most importantly, where you might go to get help and support, because life is a team sport and so is careers, and none of us should be doing this on our own or are meant to be doing this on our own. Okay, so, So what is a coaching approach? So when I first got involved in coaching, what I really loved about it was it's designed to empower you. It's designed to help you develop your own skills, sustainable skills, transferable skills, so that you actually end up with ownership over developing your own career. It increases your resourcefulness so that you don't necessarily need to ask detailed questions of how do I do such and such, because you've got more of those skills yourself. So a lot of the fine detail questions that I was asked in the chat, you know, like how do I get involved in an XYZ career? My aim is to give you the information one step back from that, which is what are the skills you need to be able to go and dive into those questions yourself, because A, you're going to own it more, that's for sure. And B, I'm absolutely convinced that whenever people ask me for advice on what they should do, no one ever actually wants my advice. So everyone is like, oh yeah, but, and do their own thing anyway. So I tend to hold my thoughts aren't necessarily right on what your career should be. So my aim is to give you the skills to take your own ownership over your own journey. Okay, so looking a bit more detailed into the principles of coaching, really wanting to look at sort of the overarching journey of who are you and, you know, where are you now? Where do you want to go and how are you going to get there? It seems kind of really obvious, but it's not necessarily explicit. That when we come up with daily goals, you know, I need to cook dinner. We actually go through that process. What am I doing now? What do I need to do? How am I going to do it? How am I going to manage the obstacles? But it's really worth bringing this up to the surface and making it explicit. And so let's dive in. Okay, who are you? Well, a lot of people, when they come to see me, kind of automatically ask, you know, what's my personality suited to? And those type of questions. And in truth, I very rarely do formal discussions about people's personality. And the reason is that personality, you know, we're talking about a habitual way of responding to the world is what we mean by personality, but it changes in different contexts and depending, you know, we grow and change over time. So that's one thing. I don't see ourselves as necessarily as fixed as, you know, today this is your personality and that means something for your career forever. I don't see that. The other, if we flip the question, the other is, you know, what type of personality does XYZ career require? A kind of part of me wants to go, well, all specialties and all careers, a mix of personality is going to be helpful for that specialty. So I tend not to spend a lot of time in personality for those reasons. However, if at the end, we'll give you the link to the ebook. I know there are some personality self-questionnaires you can do that I've linked to in there. For your own interest, it's a good starting point. I spend more time talking to people about their strengths because these are things that we can deliberately use once we become more aware of them, and how to become more aware of them. I don't have a lot of time tonight to go into that, and I would encourage you to look. There's some activities that I've put in the ebook and some questionnaires. But one exercise I would really encourage you to start doing is to start keeping a record of the things that are going well for you at work. You know, what went well today? How come it went well? What was your contribution to it going well? What have you learned from that? And as you go about, if you would track that every day for 2 weeks, you're going to start to see patterns of, oh, I'm actually really good at such and such. And that starts to reveal your strengths to you in context of work versus the questionnaires, which are much more generic, like kindness or prudence or something like that. So I actually love the what went well activity, and I've got more detailed instructions of that in the ebook. The other really important piece in thinking about who you are is taking stock of your values. What is actually important to you in life? Why are you here in medicine? What does it mean to you to be a doctor? What would you like and hope to contribute? All of these things are foundational and need to come before any career pathway decisions. Because once we embed our career into our values, then it becomes sustainable and meaningful versus that sense of being, here I am, and I'm not quite sure why. So I've had a lot of people come to me over the past 5 years. I've finished a certain specialty and I don't really know if I want to do it or not. I'm not quite sure why I'm in this specialty. So I would love it that these questions are asked before you engage on the very long journey of specializing in whatever it is, because that is a huge amount of money and time and sacrifices. So it's really, I would encourage everyone to start getting a sense of what your values are around life, around work, and what are your priorities? What is your priority with family? And, you know, you can ask yourself questions like, at the end of my career, when I retire, how will I have made myself proud? That's one question you can think about to start getting a handle on what is really important to me in life. And again, in terms of those priorities, I do have an exercise in the workbook. But along with all of those exercises, I think my favorite approach to answering that question, who are you, is self-reflection. Because let's face it, questionnaires, they're very useful, but they don't necessarily bring up that uniqueness of you, and everyone is unique and special. And so it's starting that self-reflective process. Who am I? What are my values? Why am I here? What do I want to be doing? What do I want to share with the world? What do I want to contribute to the world? So, and I've taken this activity here. I've taken this from the ebook, but just to give you an idea is, you know, grab pen and paper and start thinking about, where am I now? How did I get to here? How did I end up in medicine in the first place? Was it just because it was there? Was it, you know, that everyone has a unique story of how they got to here, and that's often reveals something about your values. Think about the highlights, what you enjoyed most and think you did well, what you're proud of. What do you think you're really good at, but you haven't had a chance to use much? Or what are the things you're good at, but you don't really like? So thinking about those sorts of things is going to start giving you a real, much more clarity on who you are and where you are, and start giving hints to where it is that you might want to go. And again, I'm encouraging you to download the ebook. It's got the activities and exercises in it. And I also encourage you, as you do them, to write down your answers. Don't just think about it, because something about writing that clarifies things a lot more than just thinking. So, and I would say that the exercise of who are you can take a while. It's not a short part of coaching. It's quite an important part. And I will spend time in the who are you and where are you now questions, because they're foundational and they do need to come first before you start thinking about where do you want to go. So when people come to me, what career should I do? Well, the answer that I give, that's probably a hard answer, is let's look at who you are first before we start looking at what career might suit you. And so activities are like developing a vision. A compelling vision is really helpful, especially one that's linked to your values. And you could create a vision board or talk it out with a friend. There's some other ways to do it. And of course, there's the step of researching options, which is a very cognitive reductionist approach. But so those are the things that kind of you need to do. Where do I want to go? I need to have a vision and look at my options. But what's not explicit there is what is the difference between traditional and non-traditional careers? Because the way we're going to go about getting into those jobs or training pathways is completely different. It's a very different process with a really different landscape. So if we think about traditional medical careers, I like to think about navigating a traditional career, whatever sort of, I finish my internship, I do some sort of residency, get onto a training program, finish that training program, then get a job as a consultant somewhere. That I understand that as being like using GPS to navigate your way somewhere. The information's outside of you, developed by other people. You actually have to put in an end address. You have to have a goal in mind. So I have to put in, take me to become a urologist in this city with these type of patients. So you can plug all that in and you'll get an answer of like, okay, here we go. Try this training program in this institution, meet these people. And so it's like GPS. And as you get off track, the GPS is going to recorrect you. Okay, so this hospital didn't work out, but maybe try that hospital for training, or try this general practice for training, or that practice. So it's the GPS approach. And it's what I think when people say, how do I get involved in something? I feel like what you're really asking me is to be Google Maps for you. And with a traditional career, whatever specialty, it is like that. But because I know there's such a high demand for the non-clinical or the non-traditional careers, the GPS approach is actually, it doesn't work. First of all, because you don't necessarily have an actual destination in mind. You might have a direction in mind, but you might not have as fine detail as I want to be an X type of specialist doing certain types of procedures or whatever. It might just be, I want to be involved in health IT, or so it'll be directional, but without a necessary, the endpoint will still be fuzzy. So we can't really use the GPS approach when we've got a fuzzy endpoint. So I think about non-traditional careers as going back to the old days where I come from, as using a paper map, where you actually have to start looking, understanding the map markings and the geography and the landscape, and figuring out what the possible pathways are, where you might want to go, how you might do it, what detours you might want to make. It's a very different process. It's a slower process, but the advantages are that when you navigate this way, you can get lost, which is an advantage because you find things you weren't aware of. You suddenly run into an obstacle, like, red lights or roadworks that you had no idea about, and you need to take a detour, and you find things you weren't aware of. So the journey itself unfolds in front of you. So you start off, I'm heading in the general direction. I want to go north. I think I'm going north. And as I start stepping north, I find more information. And then I go, well, actually, it's slightly northeast will actually be slightly better. And as I go forward, I reassess and keep going that way. It's an unfolding. It's a very different type of headspace to going into a traditional medical career, which is why it becomes really hard when people say, how do I get involved in XYZ? Because all I can really give you is principles, because every single person's journey is idiosyncratic. It's so unique to that person that I could sit down for half an hour and tell you my story of how I went from being a GP to here, and none of it anybody else could replicate. It was all just such an idiosyncratic thing. So those questions are very hard. They cause me stress because it's like, you want an answer and there is no actual answer. So, so when we think about the non-traditional career, it's really this process of try, fail, learn, adjust over and over again. And it's hard. You've got to, it takes courage to embark on this, especially coming out of medicine, which is so prescribed. This pathway, the conveyor belt is, we might have 15 years of having what we need to do laid out for us. So when we come from that way of being into the world where it's like, we'll go figure it out, it's very daunting. So it takes courage, it takes a lot of curiosity, openness to opportunity. It takes patience to let it unfold. And I had one client I worked with for over a year before they finally said to me, oh, I get what you mean by letting it unfold. Wow, it all worked out in such a different way to what I could have ever guessed. So it's a different way of being. And you really need to be comfortable with not knowing. I know what direction I'm headed in, but I don't know exactly what it's going to be. All reasons why when people ask, how do I get involved in such and such? I'm like, I can tell you how to be in process. I can support you in process. I can give you the skills to be in process. But I don't know where you're going to end up, because you're going to discover that as you go along. You're going to create your own unique space in the world. And so it's quite exciting, but it's more daunting. It's stepping into the unknown. Okay, so if we were kind of in person, I'd be saying any questions at this point, and I'd be looking to see if there were nods and understanding, and I don't have that. So I'm going to make the grand assumption that you're all sitting there nodding sagely going, wow, that's amazing. And move on to really the meat of this talk, because by far the most number of people wanted to know about imposter syndrome and burnout. So there's a whole piece in the career planning about setting goals and making sure they're appropriate and how you might go about setting a goal. I don't have time in this webinar tonight, but what I want to talk about is identifying managing obstacles, because it's all very well you say, I want to go over there, but there's a snake pit and a flood and a volcano and all these things in the way. And in terms of career, these things, typically the ones I see are uncertainty. I don't know how to manage uncertainty. Imposter syndrome, you know, I feel like a fake and a fraud and no one would ever want me and I'm not qualified or good enough to go and do those things. And of course, burnout. Burnout's a major prompt for wanting to leave medicine. And both of those things are, imposter syndrome and burnout are probably the most common reasons why people will come and say, should I leave clinical work? So they're both a cause of wanting to leave and then a cause of feeling blocked in how to progress. So in truth, the resolution of those things becomes, let's address the imposter syndrome and the burnout. And then when you're in a much better and healthier headspace, then we'll talk about careers. So I wanted to just then spend some time talking about imposter syndrome and burnout at a high level to give you a taste of the approach I take with these things. And of course, more information in the ebook, and I've got more information on our website and etc. So let's have a little high level look. Okay, imposter syndrome. It's not a medical diagnosis at all. It used to be called a phenomenon, but really it's that space where talented people, competent people don't see themselves as being such. So you get external feedback that you're great, and there's a part of you that says, I just don't believe that. I don't feel good enough. In fact, I'll probably never be good enough. So we engage in this imposter cycle, and I've adapted this from the first people. I've adapted this from another source, which I've put on the slide there. So essentially, let's start. There's an achievement related task. You need to admit a patient, you need to do a procedure, you need to organize investigations, whatever it is, you need to do something. And then we get this immediate anxiety, self-doubt, worry, you know, along the lines of maybe I'll miss something, maybe I get it wrong, I'm not good enough, I'm going to fail at this, maybe they should ask someone else, maybe I should quit. So all of these thoughts come up straight away when there's this task we need to do. And then we go one of two ways. I commonly see people who over-prepare, which means I spend way too long writing notes, and especially GPs will do a lot of, I spend way too much time, I stay back so late writing notes and double checking my notes. And then I log in when I go home and check results. And it's this whole over-preparation. And in fact, I really need to study up on 5 topics a night. And it's a way of using up the anxious energy, but not necessarily resolving the reason for the anxiety. So that's over preparation. It's exhausting, and it's a contributor to burnout, no doubt. The other pathway people tend to go down, and I know that this is much more me, is procrastination. Well, I don't have to do it yet. I'll put it off. So whenever I'm delivering a webinar, like, well, let's be vulnerable here, I will usually come sliding into the webinar with 5 minutes to spare. I finish my slides. It's, you know, in my ideal world, I would have it ready in a nice, calm way, but somehow in my own imposter talk, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I could do it. Procrastinate until I have to do it. So I'm sure that we're all to some degree either over preparing or procrastinating or both. And then what inevitably happens, because all of us here are fundamentally competent, I really believe that, it's the people who doubt themselves that statistically are the most competent. So I've got no hesitation in saying anyone who's doubting themselves, you're fine, right? So we're going to accomplish, and we get this momentary feeling of relief. Whew, I did it, I got away with it. We'll get positive feedback. But of course, we just discount that. I don't really believe it. And happily attribute a success to either effort or luck. Well, it was just because I spent that much time doing extra study, or I was just lucky that, you know, they asked the right questions or whatever it is. So we're not attributing ourselves as competent in this. It's just that we weren't really good, but we put in extra effort, so we got away with it. Or I was just lucky, so I got away with it. And then, you know, so at this stage, we then move around the cycle. And of course, because we're not attributing our actual competence, we're attributing other things, we build into that sense of, I'm really a fraud. I really don't deserve to be here. Maybe I'm not cut out to be a doctor. Maybe I should leave medicine, right? And of course, that then feeds into these underlying beliefs and schemas that are often sitting, this is the thing, the real root cause sitting right underneath it is these beliefs like, and it's an example, I need to be a good doctor and always get it right. Or I need to keep everybody around me happy. There'll be those sorts of beliefs sitting right underneath that's driving all of this imposter behavior. And those beliefs will have inevitably been developed in childhood and absolutely reinforced by the medical system we work in, because guess what, it's litigious. So if you get it wrong, there are high stakes for getting it wrong. So all of those things freeze us into this cycle, and it's actually quite difficult to break out of, but it can be done. Because I did it, so if I can do it, anyone can do it. That's the thing, but it takes honesty and vulnerability to face up to the fact that there's vulnerabilities we need to address in this. And obviously, I think I've said a lot of these, but this is what people say when I start thinking, is this imposter syndrome? You know, I feel like a fake, I don't feel competent. This is a big one. Everyone else is better than me. As soon as I hear that comparison, I know that there's an issue here, right? I take way too long taking notes. I feel sick every morning after work. I once had a head of department tell me that they still sometimes had to pull over to the side of the road and vomit before they went to it. This is a senior doctor. So it's very common. It's normal to the extent that it's a human experience, right? So there's nothing wrong with you that you're having this, but it interferes and can get in the way. You know, I go home at night and worry, ruminate. You know, I might get caught out and reported. Maybe I'm in the wrong profession. I'm not good. So all of these things, what people say and they're thinking, is they're the me going, I wonder if there's some imposter syndrome happening here. And then just to take a little sidestep to burnout. And the reason I've done that is because burnout and imposter syndrome are so closely interlinked. They feed into and reinforce each other. So for those, as a refresher, you know, but the ICD-11 defines burnout as an unresolved chronic workplace stress that results in exhaustion, cynicism, and negativity, and a reduced sense of efficacy. I don't feel like I'm achieving anything anymore. And interestingly enough, most people don't necessarily come to me saying I'm burned out. I mean, sometimes they do, but what I often get when there's burnout is maybe I should change jobs. I'm so anxious. I just don't care anymore. I've lost confidence. I feel like a fraud. So you can kind of see how similar the thought patterns are in terms of burnout and imposter syndrome. You know, because neither of them are diagnoses as such. It is a very blurred line. It's really about looking at each individual person and figuring out what is life like for you and coming up with a personalized approach to managing whatever is going on. And so I tend, in the end, even though I've said burnout, imposter syndrome, I actually tend not to give labels. We tend to talk about what is actually happening in your experience. What's this experience getting in the way of you achieving? What do we need to do? What do you need to start to get a healthier or happier experience? So, like I've said, they're not illnesses, but they can have some pretty big consequences at a personal and professional level. And we know that there's evidence that, you know, people, it impacts relationships, it impacts mental health. At a professional level, burnout absolutely is linked to medical error. So anyone who's feeling burned out, pushing through is actually a very interesting decision, because I'm burned out because I'm worried about making a mistake. But now I'm burned out, I'm actually more likely to be making a mistake. So we've got to break that cycle of the consequences of these phenomena that aren't illnesses, but have a very big impact on us. So my view of these things probably changes around every 6 months as I learn more information and speak to more people. And my current view is that they are both a kind of embodied story that have a psychological and a physiological component, and often, probably most often, related to some past trauma that's happened. So it will either be a childhood trauma, or it could be a trauma that's happened during medical training or working as a doctor, because let's face it, even if you came out with the most perfect childhood, which probably no one has a perfect childhood, but even if you were, going through medical training is traumatic. You're exposed to death and suffering, and there's really not much psychological support. There's bullying and there's all sorts of stuff that goes on that are traumatic. So we start getting our nervous system wired for trauma. So That's my current view of imposter syndrome and burnout. And if I give this talk again next year, I may have a new nuance in my understanding of it. So they're both overlap, they're interlinked. And it's really some kind of a relationship between the environmental demands on you. You know, what are the requirements, expectations, the relationships that you're existing in? What are all of those things demanding on you and doing to you, you know, from an outside in perspective? Because this environment is really important. And it's important because there's no blame here in any of this. I'm not saying it's a story to show that it's your own fault for the story. It's to say that when we're people, we create stories about the things that happen to us. That's what we all do. And the environment is, that's where the system and others have control over resolving things. So often I'll give a talk about burnout and everyone says, but that's just individual. What about the system? And it's a really important question because the system is sort of burnoutogenic, if you like. The system creates it, but I can't solve this. An individual, we can't solve the system. I don't actually know who can. But I've come to, well, what I can do is help individuals survive the system better and make decisions about whether they're going to stay in the system or leave the system, and how, if they're going to stay, how they're going to stay, so that it starts to bring some autonomy back. So it's kind of changing the system around the edges. So that's this relationship. And then, so we've got the environment, and we're all always in an environment. We don't exist outside it, we're part of it. But then at an individual level, we've got our autonomic nervous system and then stories we tell ourselves. And both of these are influenced by things like our personality and our vulnerabilities and past traumas are all, you know, interacting with each other to create what on the outside there is our experience. We have an experience that's made up of these things and in the context of an environment. So, and, you know, we can see there's, I mean, I really enjoyed writing this slide. You know, how many environmental demands can I come up with that push us into feeling like imposters or burnout? And this was all before COVID, let alone what COVID's put us through. So I don't need to tell you guys, this is the reality. There's uncertainty, pressure, complexity, inefficiencies, complaints, infections, lack of resources, bullying, errors. It's just on and on and on. We work in a volatile and unstable environment, and it's actually very difficult to get through that. And we're really not, in my experience, I don't see that we're really training people to manage that type of complexity and pressure. It's kind of a suck it up, sweetheart, cope or don't cope, but I'm not really going to give you skills to manage. So, you know, if it was up to me, I would be starting this type of work in medical school, but the curriculum's already crowded, so I'm not sure about my chances. Anyway, so just to come back with a very brief refresher of the stress curves, which were the Yerkes-Dodson curves, which is obviously just a model, but along the bottom is, you know, this is our stress or arousal level, and the y-axis is our performance, what we're actually doing. So clearly, if you have very low arousal, we're not doing anything. I mean, this might be lying on a beach, enjoying a cocktail or something. I don't have much arousal, I'm very relaxed, but I'm not doing anything either. As soon as I need to do and achieve something, I need my autonomic nervous system to start going. And this is like, I need adrenaline. Adrenaline is going to get me up to here. It's going to get me crawling, walking, running, doing my daily job. It's functional, it's healthy, we need it. What the problem becomes is when we have too much for too long. You know, up here is, we call it the stretch zone, which is like, I'm at my peak performance, I'm doing it, I'm going fine, but I'm really I've got chronic stress hormones, I've got too much cortisol or too much adrenaline happening here. So I can be here a little bit, but if I'm here too long, I very quickly can tip over the edge, collapse, overwhelm, burnout. I also think this is a panic attacks space as well. I've just tipped over into too much stress hormones for too long and I crash out. And the difficulty is it actually takes a while to recover. It's not like I can just get a good night's sleep and I'm back. There's been a buildup of all of this stuff going on for a while. We need to reset our system. It takes time. So ideally, what we want to do is aim to stay on this side of the curve, which means knowing yourself. Where am I? Am I right up here? Do I need to do something to bring myself down the curve? And a lot of this is about, in practical terms, managing our autonomic nervous system and our self-talk. But the autonomic nervous system comes first, because if we're not regulated, we can't actually manage the self-talk or anything. So autonomic nervous system. So what I would kind of want to ask, hands up, who knows about polyvagal theory? And I'm assuming some of you do and some of you don't. If you do, bear with me. And if you don't, I hope you find this interesting and helpful. But essentially, it's, the study of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is actually a bundle of multiple nerves that have got somewhat opposing functions. So if we look at our overall autonomic nervous system, what we've got, ventral branch of the vagus nerve, that runs supradiaphragmatically. That's the part of us that connects with others. We feel resourced, we can manage challenges. What we want in life is to have our ventral vagus nerve in charge. Then we can cope. But what happens is we can get overwhelmed. If we let our sympathetic nervous system, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis take over for too long, the vagus nerve actually turns off. It gets overwhelmed, it's turned off. And I know my vagus is turned off because I'm in fight or flight. When I'm in fight or flight, my executive functioning is pretty much offline, or it's at least impaired, because all of our resources move to, I need to find safety. I'm either going to fight it or run away. I don't care about the nuance of solving this challenge out there. I don't care about all of those things, irrelevant. How do I get away or how do I fight? So when we're feeling burned out and when we're feeling super stressed and we're in fight or flight, it's actually a very difficult space to be practicing safe medicine in. I don't, obviously it happens, someone has an arrest and whatever. It can be helpful, but not for too long, please, because I want you up here in ventral branch, because then I know you're going to be making less mistakes. We're going to be feeling more confident in ourselves, less comparison. Down here, we're starting to compare with people. So when I hear someone say to me, everyone else is better than me, I'm like, that's fight or flight. That's a comparison. And then the final piece of our autonomic nervous system is the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, which has the exact opposite function of the ventral branch. This dorsal branch runs below the diaphragm, and it's essentially that freeze response. Collapse, play dead, let me lie here and just I don't know, I don't want to know, keep me out of it. I'll just play dead until the whole problem goes away. I disconnect, I dissociate, I feel foggy and numb. And this actually takes a long time to recover from once you're in this space. And part of the reason it takes a long time to recover from is obviously there's, and you guys will know probably way better than me, there's all these neurotransmitters and hormones flying around. Well, they have to be metabolized. They don't just disappear. They don't just go, oh, I'm not at work now. Our body is still, our physiology is still responding. So even if our brain doesn't want to do it, this is beyond our conscious control now. The body has done its own thing. It's in fight or flight, or it's in freeze. And we then need to do what we can to recover, and it can take a while. And I'm sure people who've been seriously burned out will know it can be months, which is why it's so important to be preventing these things. So I'll move on to strategies for this in a minute. But what I do just want to say is that the stories we tell ourselves are very dependent on our autonomic state. So same person, same situation, and you can do this little exercise for yourself. Depending on if you're in ventral vagus, sympathetic, or dorsal vagus states, same situation, you'll come up with a whole different story about what's going on and why. And so this is just a lovely quote by one of the polyvagal researchers, and I'll read it out. The stories clients or people tell themselves about who they are and how the world works begins in the autonomic nervous system. Information sent through autonomic pathways from the body to the brain, where it's translated into beliefs that shape daily living. The brain takes the autonomic information and creates a story to make a sense of what's happening in the body. If you want to change the story, start by changing the state. So this is where there's a lot of body work that needs to happen. And it's a strength of doctors is that we exist a lot in our brains. We're very cognitive. We solve problems with our brains and disconnect to a degree from what's happening in our bodies. So part of the resolution of this is coming back into our body and getting to know what's going on in our body, because our bodies aren't, this is happening beyond our conscious control and we're not aware of it. And then it's trapped us. It's trapped us into responding from a fight or flight way. Okay, and I know I'm nearly running out of time, but so I just to say that these things happen outside conscious awareness. So there's absolutely no blame in having a story about what's going on. It's not there's something wrong with you. It's, hey, your autonomic nervous system isn't feeling safe. So your system is creating that story. This is not a blame thing. It's a, how do I help my system feel more safe? And that so part of the role of the autonomic nervous system is it sits in the background beyond conscious control, scanning the environment. Am I safe? Am I safe? Like a radar, am I safe? Am I safe? And our body will detect a threat and respond to it before our brains have even put up. So, sometimes you can walk into a room and go, something's wrong. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling agitated. I've got no idea why. And we actually do have a language for that. We call it a gut feel. Sometimes we say heart sync or spidey sense. These are all things where our bodies are trying to communicate to us. And what we need to do is learn how to listen better. I am going a little long over time, so I just want to check, Benjamin, is this okay to keep going? Give me a thumbs up.
Of course, Dr. Lowinger. It's your webinar. We'll do
Okay.
Q&A with whatever we have left.
Okay, all right. So obviously managing all of this starts with regulating the autonomic nervous system. And this is a flying whistle stop tour. I use the metaphor of managing asthma. You've got to, understand what's happening, identify the triggers, reduce or avoid exposure where it's possible and feasible. And sometimes it's not. And then in terms of our, the medication, we use preventers and relievers, the long-term and short-term strategies. So in regulating our autonomic nervous system, we need that same long-term, short-term approach. One or the other isn't enough. We need to have both. And so a lot of the short-term strategies they call it the vagal brakes, which is how can I quickly wake up my ventral vagus nerve and bring it back online so I can get a handle and put the brakes on my sympathetic nervous system. So there's a bunch of things, I've got the girl blowing bubbles, but really that's about a slow exhalation. It's exhaling stimulates vagus nerve. Inhaling is sympathetic. So we want to exhale nice and slowly, the self-hug, the self-compassionate, hands on your heart. These things just soothe our system down, start to wake up vagus. Tension release. Like at work, you probably want to punch somebody sometimes, but if you get out to a boxing class or lift weights, when you're angry, slamming a what do they call them? The slam balls, whatever. The name's going out of my head. Slamming is actually an incredible way of managing anger. It gets out that energy. Planking is incredible. I've had times in my life where I've been really agitated, and the only way I can stop the agitation is doing a plank. Do a plank for a minute. I feel great. I've got the agitation has passed. This is, and I mean, these things are difficult to do at work, but they're just strategies to have in the back of your mind. Tension release is important, but so is stretching. Like, you know, and you can do this on ward rounds or in your office, and it's perfectly socially acceptable to stretch and hold the stretch for like 30 seconds or so. And then and releasing it nice and slowly as you exhale. And if you're all sort of sitting there doing that, with noticing what your system feels like before and after you stretch, it's actually incredibly calming. And usually we end up having a strategy like, let's stretch between patients, because I'm going to reset my nervous system. I could stretch throughout a ward round. I could stand there. I could stretch in an exam, actually. No one's going to look at me weird if I do this with my hands. It's an acceptable thing. So stretching is an important way of managing our system. And then, of course, so is grounding, which is that deliberate intent to come back into our body. So you might do a body scan, tune into the sensations, or what are the things around me I can hear, smell, feel, and touch, to get a sense of, here I am in my body. I'm not just a disconnected brain. And the final strategy, which is that helps us regulate our system, is empathic connection with a person who we feel safe to be vulnerable with. So you got to choose carefully, right? Don't just choose anybody. Choose somebody you can trust, who'll be non-judgmental, who will just hold you without giving advice, who will really just let you be in the stress itself and hold you in that. That's who you want to try to find. You can get that in all sorts of places. Peers, colleagues, mentors, friends, professionals, but choose wisely. We don't necessarily, especially in medicine, we don't show our vulnerability to just anybody, because we then open ourselves up to be hurt. And then here's the steroids, the preventer approach. These are all things that we need to be building in to our daily life. And I can't go past exercise, diet, and sleep. And it is like it's really boring, right? But it actually lowers our baseline arousal. So it's helpful. So on that lowered baseline, and then we add in the sort of rescue strategies that I just talked about, this gives us a much better chance of managing our autonomic nervous system. And that's going to give us a chance of keeping our executive functioning working, which helps us manage the issues that are facing us in the real world. So there's a huge list of places to get support. I've put links and all of that in my ebook. But just to say, not all of it's mental health support. Some of it's practical. Sometimes you've got a work issue. You need, sometimes it's medical defense you might need to contact, or sometimes it's employment lawyers, or sometimes it's a training issue. So use all the supports around you for whatever it is. And there's absolutely no shame in seeking support. In fact, I think it's wise. So wherever you are in your career journey, talking it out with empathic people who have your back is probably the most useful thing to be doing.
A big thank you to Avant for hosting tonight, and an enormous thank you to Dr. Jocelyn Lowinger.
And thank you to everyone for turning up.
Absolutely. To all the Avant members, to all the medical students and interns and RMOs and registrars and beyond, a big thank you to all of you for dialing in and joining us tonight. We'll see you later.
Thank you.